Podcasting from Hartford, you're listening to the Connecticut Scoreboard Podcast.
All right, college football season about to kick off this week. UConn at Fresno State. So who better to get us ready for this game than the voice of the Fresno State Bulldogs, Paul Leffler. Paul, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast today.
Hey, my pleasure. Can't wait to kick things off.
Paul, to get started, for those tuning in who are kind of learning about Fresno State for the first time, why don't you give us a little background on yourself in your role with in what you've been doing as the voice of the Bulldogs?
Well, I grew up in this area about an hour west of Fresno, a little town called Los Banos. So I grew up listening to Fresno State on the radio. Went back a little closer to you for college at Syracuse, but then wanted to see the sun again and came back here to the San Joaquin Valley. So I've been here since 1998. Been doing the baseball games at Fresno State on the radio since 2001, actually since 2000. And been doing football and basketball now about 13, 14 years. So I just have the privilege of calling all three of those sports on the radio. And that's been a blast. Had a national championship in baseball. We've seen guys like Aaron Judge and Derek Carr and Paul George come through. So the time flies when you have young men like that to talk about.
Definitely some really cool guys that have come through the program there. As you're looking at this year's Fresno State football team, as you're starting to put in that prep for this first game on Saturday, take us through what your initial thoughts of this team are heading into the season and what UConn fans can expect come Saturday afternoon our time, but a morning kickoff for you guys.
It's so surreal. I don't think any of us around the Fresno State have ever had a Fresno State game in any sport start that early in the day. So it's going to be a new one. The breakfast burritos are going to be off the hook. I know. I think they'll probably set a record for those. And I for UConn fans, holy moly, I can't imagine what it's been like to wait 2 years for another football game. I know just for the fans here, not being able to attend in person last year, they are so eager, so chomping at the bit to be out there, the red wave, to cheer on Fresno State. But as far as this Bulldog team, I'm really impressed so far with what I've seen. They have mostly everybody back. They have some super seniors like Ronnie Rivers, who's going to rewrite the record book at running back. Jake Haener, had the number one passing offense in the conference last year and really didn't have great protection. So the offensive line appears to be upgraded. There's a little more depth there. The rapport that Jake has with his weapons on offense is light years ahead of where it was last year. Because here's something I know UConn fans can understand. Fresno State last year had 0 spring practice, 0 summer workouts, and no fall practice until very late in the game when the Mountain West reversed course, said we're going to play in the fall after all. So they got an accelerated camp after school had already started. They really didn't have a traditional year in any sense, but they were up against teams who did in their conference, who had spring ball, who had summer workouts, who had fall practice. So it was a real behind the 8 ball kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I think you could say they overachieved with the results that they had. But this year, I think that experience of last year goes into it. They're confident. They feel like they can handle anything. And just the depth on both sides of the ball, I think, is really incredible and way ahead of where it was a year ago.
I know you mentioned the numbers that the offense was able to put up last year. For UConn fans who might be tuning in to check out Fresno State for the first time, take us through what the style of play is like from a Fresno team under Coach DeBoer.
So Kalen DeBoer, he's a second-year head coach here at Fresno State. He's been a head coach before at the NAIA level, won a couple national championships with the University of Sioux Falls, where he went 67-3. Wow. You think about that. He lost 3 games, and one of those was a national championship game. His track record was impressive, but he was brought here by Jeff Tedford, the previous coach, who had been a great quarterback at Fresno State, of course, Coach Cal. Jeff noticed that Kalen had turned around offenses everywhere he'd gone, at Southern Illinois, at Eastern Michigan. He did that here at Fresno State with a very prolific offense that won a Mountain West championship under Coach Tedford. And then he left. He went to Indiana and was the offensive coordinator in Indiana. And UConn fans remember 2019 when the Huskies played Indiana. Coach DeBoer was the offensive coordinator of that Hoosier team. So his philosophy is you've got to be versatile as an offense. Yes, you can push the tempo, you can hurry things up, but when you have that lead, you're going to have to slow things down a little bit. You want to be versatile enough to have different personnel packages and run the football and be physical when you need to, but have that quick strike offense as well. And Jake Haener is the kind of trigger man who can make that happen. They have weapons. I've got to tell you, we've seen some great wideouts at Fresno State over the years, going back to guys like Henry Ellard and Stephon Page in the 80s. The group that David Carr had, had some pros in it like Bernard Berrien. Then you see what Derek Carr had with Devontae Adams and actually 3,000-yard receivers on the same team when Derek was here. I've got to tell you, the unit they have now in the receiving corps is deeper than any wide receiver group I've ever seen at Fresno State. And that's saying something given the history. So I think Jake Haener is a little bit right now like a kid in a candy store. And this offense, if everybody can stay healthy and the offensive line can protect them, I think we may see some video game kind of numbers this year.
I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup to look at in this game, UConn's defense against that high-powered offense, because the UConn defense has struggled in the past. But again, as Coach Edsel said, he's excited to see this group finally back out on the field after a year of getting stronger and bigger. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic between those two units out there. I know you mentioned Jake Haener as the quarterback there. Ronnie Rivers, you said, is going to break records this year at running back. Who are some other guys on both sides of the ball that UConn fans should be on the lookout for in this game? Who will be those big playmakers?
Well, the first guy who comes to mind is Jalen Cropper. He wears number 5. He's a local product who had all kinds of Power 5 offers, but said, I want to stay home in the San Joaquin Valley. And he's a difference maker, man. He's added 25 pounds of muscle in the off season and says he's even faster. And that's hard to believe because he was really fast before. He's very elusive. He's a big run after catch guy. We may see him in the kick return game as well. So that's number 5, Jalen Cropper, big time playmaker. They have another really quick veteran receiver in Carrick Wheatfall. You see him wearing number 1. Zane Pope wears number 2. He's been a leading receiver on this team in the past, a great possession receiver. And one guy they're getting back from injury who missed all of last year is Amorie Edwards. He wears number 4. He's a guy who has tremendous hands and just always seems to find the right spot. Josh Kelly will wear number 11. He proved himself as a big play threat last year. He had close to 200 yards in one game. So, I mean, you go through the list and you almost forget somebody every time because there's just so many of these quality receivers. And when Kalen DeBoer was here before as the offensive coordinator, the tight end played a real major role in the offense. And at tight end this year, they have a guy in Juan Rodriguez, who's a veteran, who's kind of the hybrid, who's excellent as a blocker and solid as a receiver. But there's another young tight end. I don't know if he'll show up quite as much in this very first game of his career, but a true freshman named Trey Watson, number 84. He's going to be a guy I think we see on Sundays someday, and we'll see how soon that potential really shows up. And that's just the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, when it comes to the flip side, on the defensive side, who are some names there that the fans should be on the lookout for?
Well, there are some proven commodities. A guy like David Perales, number 99, was a transfer who got his first chance to play last year. He had 4 weeks in a row where he forced a fumble. I mean, he was just living in the opponent's backfield. And you have him at one defensive end. You had a returning starter who had a 3-sack game last year, Kwame Jones, at the other defensive end. But right now, a young man named Aaron Mosby is listed ahead of him. And Mosby's a fascinating young man. He played at the same high school as Jalen Cropper, the Sanger Apaches, who just had their alum Tom Flores going to the Hall of Fame this year. Everyone around here is proud of that.
Very nice.
Aaron Mosby started out his career as a safety. Then they moved him to linebacker. Now he's a defensive end. And I think that may be the position for him in the future because he's got a real nice blend of power and speed. And it'll be interesting to see how UConn's offensive line handles him coming off the edge. So that front four has some depth and some firepower. The guy in the middle of that, Kevin Atkins, is probably the most experienced guy on the defense as a defensive tackle, a real good run stuffer. One guy I know all the Fresno State fans are eager to see is a young man named Tyson Maeva. Fresno State had played against him when he was at Boise State. In fact, he was kind of infamous in Bulldog lore because he was caught on video twisting the helmet of Fresno State's quarterback after the play. So he was like the villain. But then he went to Florida International and he absolved himself of his Bronco sins. And then he could transfer to Fresno State. So he's actually a team captain, his very first year in the program. And he's a guy who just exudes leadership, brings a lot of physicality to that linebacker position. And then when you look at the secondary, and they play a 4-2-5 scheme, so they've got that nickel, or the husky as they call it, is kind of a tweener between a linebacker and a safety. They have a couple playmakers at that position, but they have some experience in the secondary as well, and some guys who can certainly bring some physicality. Elijah Gates is a transfer from UCLA who looks to get some time right away. But the real leader of that secondary is a guy named Evan Williams, who has proven himself as a playmaker, really good speed and great ball skills. So Evan Williams would be number 32. He's probably one of the biggest numbers to watch on that defensive side of the ball.
It seems like, just based on what you're telling me, this Fresno State team really has a lot of pieces to just have a really successful season. What's the feeling around Fresno in terms of the ceiling of this team? Is this a team that's expected, to really compete at the top of the conference and look at that type of, standard for this season?
I guess that depends on who you ask. They do have 20 of 22 starters returning. So usually that bodes pretty well for a team. Of course, last year was such a strange year in so many ways. And in theory, they're not going to have to deal with the madness they dealt with last year. In the Mountain West, the preseason poll of conference media had Fresno State fourth in the West Division, fourth out of 6 in the West Division. And I think that surprised a few people because people around here know what kind of quality and depth is on this roster and know the kind of coach Kalen DeBoer is. But it is a very loaded West Division in the Mountain West this year. Nevada's got a lot of firepower back. Hawaii has a returning quarterback. There are some teams that it can get it done in the West. San Diego State's been a perennial power. So it's not going to be easy, but and the schedule will be challenging for Fresno State. Next week, the Bulldogs go to Oregon to take on a nationally ranked Duck team. A couple weeks later, they go to UCLA. In conference, Boise State comes here. Fresno State goes to Wyoming, which is a physical and sometimes weather challenge. So there will be some hurdles, but, basing this team in the preseason compared to other teams I've seen, I'm really struck, Jared, by the maturity of this squad, the focus and the mentality. And every championship team I've ever seen has some element of that. This team seems to have developed that pretty early, and I think that can bode really well.
One thing you mentioned there that I wanted to ask, and I think it's a good segue. I think it's hard to sleep on an opening game, but when you've got Oregon lined up week 2, you've been around this team for a while. Do you get the feeling that they're still taking UConn as seriously as they can heading into week 1 with that, big time game on the horizon there?
I'm very confident that they're focused on the Huskies. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. First of all, it's just the philosophy of Coach DeBoer. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. We're not worrying about the past. We're not agonizing over the future. We are in the present. We're right here, right now. But also, he's coached against Randy Edsall before. He has great respect for UConn. They've done their homework on the personnel on that Husky roster. Even talking to, the quarterback, Jake Haener. He's been watching UConn's defensive linemen on film, and he's impressed with those guys. He's not taking them lightly at all. So I think this is a Fresno State team that's going to come out focused, that is really energized by the opportunity to finally have fans at the game again, and really wants to put on a show and not leave anything up to chance, control what they can control. I think that's the overall philosophy of this team. And some teams say that and you're like, okay, you don't really believe that. I think with this squad, it really rings sincere when you hear it coming out of the mouths of guys like Jake Haener and Ronnie Rivers and some of those defensive leaders too.
I saw, just looking ahead at the forecast, we're expecting a temperature 100, 105 for this game. Is this a norm come this time of year for Fresno area that they're used to playing in these conditions? Because I know that's going to be a little bit of something different for UConn here.
Well, what we all say out here in the Great San Joaquin Valley is it's a dry heat. And, that's mostly true. It's rarely humid here. And I've spent enough time, around your neck of the woods and in Bristol and back up in Syracuse to know that this time of year, there is a little humidity in the air. There's some of that moisture, and you're not going to have that here. So that makes a difference. 105 and dry is probably 92 and humid. I mean,
all right. So what we've got today here. So, okay. All right.
There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want Fresno State to disown me because I'm, pulling off the veil on the reality. But yeah, the dry heat is the dry heat. I will say though, that with that artificial turf, they have a beautiful AstroTurf field that's got a natural fill to it. It does emanate some heat. So I think their legs might be 130 while the air is 105. And if they haven't really felt that before, that could be a problem because the sun will be bright and it will be reflecting off that turf.
Yeah, no, definitely just one of those interesting things to keep in mind as we get ready for this game. I've got to ask, How are you prepping for this game, given that you haven't seen anything that UConn's done over the past year? So I'm curious to just get in your head a little bit. And how do you prep for an opponent that you really don't have much on?
That is the challenge. You're flying blind a little bit. So you're at the mercy of, what the UConn Sports Information Department is putting out as far as a depth chart. The first thing I do, and I'm sure every announcer would tell you this, is you've got to double check pronunciations, right? And even if you read it on the paper, you want to circle back verbally and make sure that when you say it, you're saying it right, because that's the easiest thing to get right, but the most frequent thing that ends up getting wrong. So, there are those things. And then I think it's kind of fun, actually, when you think about it. When you've seen the same program 20 times and you know what to expect, it's a little different than saying, hey, there's a little unknown here. And that's why we all love sports. It's the unknown. It's the unpredictable. We don't really know what's going to happen on game day until game day. So I think a game like this, where there's so much mystery and there's so much cloudy reality of what UConn might be in 2021, that it kind of adds an extra element of excitement and surprise, as in, hey, 11 a.m. Saturday here on the West Coast. Let's see what the Huskies are all about.
Absolutely. I know it's one that's just got a lot of intrigue to it in terms of just trying to figure out what this team is going to look like. So to see them finally in gameplay is going to be exciting to see there. I know you mentioned it, and as we wrap here, kind of go in the other direction from football. You having done baseball there and being right here in the Hartford area in the heart of kind of split Yankee Red Sox territory, I got to ask about what it was like to see Aaron Judge go through college there. He's a big favorite out this way.
Oh, he's a favorite right here in my house. I'll tell you. Last year, he put on, well, it was a year and a half ago, he put on a fundraising event here for his All Rise Foundation, and he asked me to MC the event. And
cool.
And then he put on a camp at Fresno State without any fanfare, just a free camp for kids in the community. And I made sure that my daughters went out and talked to him. So they'd been around him when he was a player here. But what I told my daughters was, hey, there aren't a whole lot of guys that I tell you it's really important for you to meet, but I really want you to spend some time with Aaron, because he's the real deal. He's not putting on a show. He is so sincere. He's got a special family, and he has a perspective that I think has really served him well in his career. If you think about it, imagine yourself as Aaron Judge with those kind of obvious physical God-given abilities. He's known since he was in high school that he was going to be an all-timer at something, right? Mm-hmm. It could have been football. I'm sure he could have played college basketball. I believe he picked the right sport. But when you're going to be great, when you have something that nobody else has, that's a bit of a burden, and that can really lead you astray, right? You can get full of yourself, or you can say, I don't need to work as hard as that guy. Aaron Judge, I've got to tell you, has as good a work ethic as anybody I've ever been around. You can't play for Mike Batesel, who's still the coach here, who won the national championship in 2008, been here 20 years now. You can't play for him unless you're a grinder, unless you're going to put in the work. And he embraced his 3 years here and his journey through the minor leagues with a work ethic and a focus of, hey, I haven't arrived. I'm on my way, and I'm going to soak up every lesson I can along the way. So I'm so proud of who Aaron is, how humble he is, how sincere he is. And man, how awesome is it to watch what he does on the baseball field? Everyone, oohs and ahs over the homers, but I've got to tell you, my favorite thing, when you see him pick up a ball on the warning track or play it off the wall and just spin like he's playing catch with his brother and effortlessly laser it to the bag at the perfect spot to get the tag on. I've never seen anybody else in the history of baseball do that quite like Aaron Judge.
It's crazy to me now to see him out there playing center field. I mean, he's just a monster out in center field there. So it's been fun to see and watch him grow as a Yankee.
And he, hopefully he's wearing those pinstripes for a long time. And I can tell you a funny quick story because, again, every coach wanted him on their team, right? When he got here, the football coaches were trying to steal him away from baseball. But Mike Batesel was still trying to figure out, hey, is he going to pitch or is he going to play a position? Because he'd been drafted out of high school as a pitcher by the A's. So he tells the story that the point that he knew that Judge had to be an everyday player, in their fall workouts, they throw the baseball players out in the outfield and they let them play flag football. And he said, here's this guy, 6'7", and at that time, probably only about 240, 250. He was a little skinnier. And he's moving back that direction now, it looks like. But here's this giant, and they're playing flag football. and he's so elusive. None of these little guys can grab his flag and get him down. So Batesle's like, man, I'm not wasting that athleticism on the mound. I've got to have him in the lineup every day. And he was a joy to watch. It's people see all the home runs and they say, oh, he's always been a power hitter. He really wasn't a power hitter here. His freshman year, I don't think he pulled 3 or 4 balls the entire year. By his junior season, he was parking a few 500 feet, but he really wasn't a launch angle home run kind of guy. He was an up the middle other way, line drives everywhere kind of guy. And you still see some of that when you see those rockets out to right field.
Definitely. I'll get you out of here on this one, Paul, because we're in Connecticut. We've always got to tie something back to basketball. With you being a Syracuse guy, you got a UConn Syracuse memory that you like to look back on?
They're not all good memories from my years. When I was at Syracuse, the teams were great. My sophomore season was the year that they lost to Kentucky in the national championship game with John Wallace and Lazarus Sims and a great group under Boeheim. But my freshman year, I've got to tell you, I was in awe. I got to go to Madison Square Garden and cover the Big East tournament. And here's UConn with Jim Calhoun. And they had Donnie Marshall, Danielle Marshall. Yep. There was some guy in the corner shooting threes that wasn't really the focal point, who's a Hall of Famer, Ray Allen. He was just a little pogo stick in the corner bombing away. You had Travis Knight. I think Duran was still in the backcourt at that time. It was a great UConn team, and it was a team that as Syracuse students, we really loved to hate. And when you hear Calhoun in the postgame show with that, thick New England accent talking about what a great game it was, you're like, oh, man, we got to get you next time. So that was a great rivalry. And I've got to tell you, preparing for this football game, I've thought of that because it's pretty rare for Fresno State to compete with UConn. And all my UConn memories are Syracuse-based.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And then with Fresno coming back to UConn in the future, we've got at least 2 of these on the books. So looking forward to it. So, Paul, really appreciate you coming on today to give us the lowdown on Fresno State. I know everyone out here is excited for the game, and I'm sure it's the same out there. So best of luck on the call, and thanks so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you, and can't wait for Saturday.